Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So at this year's deadline, a bunch of teams went near nuclear all-in to potentially win the Stanley Cup this season. They pushed all their chips in the center, aka first-round picks and future assets, and said, we're going for it. We are going for it. We don't care if we shorten our overall window. So I thought it'd be a fun idea to look at the top 10 teams with the most pressure to win the Stanley Cup this season. Not win a playoff round, not make the conference finals, make the Stanley Cup finals, to win the Stanley Cup. So we're going to run through it, a bunch of factors like what they did at the trade deadline, what their prospect pool, do they have a bunch of young guys on the roster, what's their overall core's age looking like, do they have guys in their early 30s that are already regressing, or are a lot of their guys in their mid 20s, what are their preseason expectations, contract status of their core guys, bunch of different factors that go into this. So yeah, let's get into it. It's not too shocking who's within the top 10 because I think there's really only 10 teams that have like an over 4% chance to win the Stanley Cup. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably know which teams those are. I made a post on that. But yeah, let's go. Up first at number 10, I got the Washington Capitals. And again, I think the Washington Capitals very much so realistically can go on a deep Stanley Cup run, but they've already smashed expectations. I don't think any Washington Capitals fan is like, if we don't win the Stanley Cup, this season's a failure. Like, as long as they get out of the first round, because if they do lose in the first round, people are going to be using the F word with them in terms of being fugazis and frauds. But yeah, they don't have that much pressure. I'm going to be honest. Even though Ovechkin is getting up there in age, John Carlson's getting up there in age, most of the rest of their team's like 31 and below. They have such a good young prospect pool of guys like Cole Hudson, Ryan Leonard, Protas coming up, Crystal, Parasak. Like, they're going to be fine. This season, they're just smashing expectations. So as a result, they're not as cup or bust, especially with some of the other Eastern Conference teams that we're going to talk about that have been so aggressive. Yeah, as long as they get out of the first round, maybe if they lose in the second round to Carolina or New Jersey, that's a little bit disappointing. But serious cup pressure, it's just not there for Washington this year because their future is so set. And they didn't do any jack shit at the deadline as well. They traded a second round pick for Anthony Beauvillier. So yeah, Washington, not a ton of pressure in terms of winning the Stanley Cup. They check in at number 10. Number 9, Carolina, another teams whose pressure and expectations have definitely dropped after the trade deadline. They're still expected to hopefully get to an Eastern Conference Finals, I'd say. There's still expectations for this team, considering Aho's like 28 years old, Slavin's 30 years old, but definitely by trading Rantanen, picking up Stankoven and first-round picks, their window is still very wide open. They have a top 10-ish prospect pool in the entire NHL. Jarvis is still very young. Svechnikov's still only 24, 25 years old. So there's not this mounting pressure. I think next year when they have a bunch of salary cap space, spend that and Nikishin comes over from Russia, they're yet again going to be in like the top 5, top 6 because this core still hasn't made a Stanley Cup final. But for this year's run, yeah, as long as they win a first-round matchup, I'd be a little bit disappointed if they don't make the conference finals. I'm not saying I'd pick Carolina to beat Washington, but their pressure's more so, yeah, get to the Eastern Conference Finals. And if you lose to a top 3 team in the Atlantic, I'm not sure that's the end of the world for the Carolina Hurricanes, considering, yeah, they prioritize the future instead of just going on this run with Rantanen and risking him losing him for nothing. They check in at number 9. Number 8, the Florida Panthers, a team that was very aggressive at this deadline, but Seth Jones is a guy that's going to be there for the next 4 to 5 seasons, fits their core in terms of age-wise. So they gave up a lot, but again, not some kind of nuclear rental. Brad Marchand, very low-risk trade. If they don't make the Eastern Conference Finals, they only give up a second-round pick to get him. So it's not like that was nuclear all in. They got lucky because Brad Marchand wanted to go there, much like Tarasenko the prior year. And they also won the Stanley Cup last year. Like, that also matters to this. They are definitely very realistic to win the Stanley Cup, but in terms of pressure after back-to-back Stanley Cup Finals appearances and winning it last year, on top of the fact that while their core is starting to get a little bit old, most of it's just 26 to 30 years old. Like, they're going to have another 3 to 4 years at high level of contention. The one argument that you can maybe make for them to be a little bit higher is Ekblad and Bennett are pending unrestricted free agents. Ekblad, you kind of got his replacement potentially in Seth Jones, as well as Bobrovsky being a little bit old. But yeah, considering they're the defending Stanley Cup champions, I can't exactly say that like they're cup or bust. If they make the Stanley Cup final or Eastern Conference Finals, I'm not sure their fans are going to be absolutely losing it. At number 7, we have another recent Stanley Cup champion. They did much less at the deadline when looking at, they only traded a 3rd-round pick for Riley Smith. They picked up Brandon Saad for nothing. The reason why they're ahead of Florida is because obviously their Stanley Cup win is 1 year prior, as well as guys like Mark Stone's 33 years old in May. Petrangelo's already 35. Carlson's 32. Hurdle's 31. They're much older, and yeah, they've already fully they don't have any like as much promising young players or prospects like a Florida Panthers, so they only have like 2 to 3 years left at high level contention, unless they pull off some crazy Vegas move, because they've been high level contenders like every single year that they've been in the league. I'm sure they might pull off something, but as the team looks right now, yeah, their window is not that wide open. Even Jack Eichel's one of their young players, and he's still like 28 years old. I'm not saying he's going to fall off anytime soon, but yeah, for Vegas, still some pressure, especially last year after losing in the first round and only being a wild card team. But it's not quite there compared to some other teams. We kind of go up a level with Tampa Bay next. Now, they obviously have won 2 Stanley Cups in the 2020s, but that was 3-4 years ago at this point. They're back-to-back first-round exits. So there's definitely some pressure on this Tampa Bay team. And although their forwards and goaltenders aren't exactly quite old, fluctuate between the ages of like 26 and 30 years old, their defensemen are old as shit. Victor Hedman and Ryan McDonough are 34 and 35 years old. At the deadline, traded 2 first-round picks and a second for Yanni Gourde, who is a pending unrestricted free agent. Bjorkstrand does have another year. They have some pressure. They got to go at least get out of the first round for sure after back-to-back disappointing first-round exits, as well as they can get that third-round pick and become a dynasty. They're without a doubt a dynasty if they win 2 Stanley Cups back-to-back, then make Stanley Cup final, then 2 down years, but then win another one in 2025. That's a sealed dynasty. So yeah, they definitely have some pressure to become the most recent NHL dynasty. At number 5, I got the Winnipeg Jets. Didn't do massive things at the deadline, so I can't quite have them like top 3, top 4. They only traded 2 second-round picks and a fourth for Luke Shen and Brandon Tanev. But still, a lot of pressure on this group, especially last year after a disappointing first-round exit to the Colorado Avalanche. They might win the President's Trophy, definitely going to be the 1 seed in the Western Conference. And as a result, they're probably going to get the easiest matchup playing like a Vancouver, Calgary, St. Louis, or Utah. So although they have to play that tough team in the second round, whether it's going to be Dallas or Colorado, they're hopefully easily going to get out of the first round, most likely. And their core is starting to get up there in age. Dylan DeMello, Scheifele, and Hellebuck all turn 32 within the next 3 months. Morrissey's 30 in 2 weeks. So although I expect it to be a good team for a couple more years, this might be their best shot, especially considering it's Winnipeg, where you're not the most desirable destination, on top of the fact that I think Nikolai Ehlers at this point, all signs are indicating turn to hit the open market, and you're not going to be able to replace him at least next season. Maybe your prospects, they do have a good prospect pool, so the future is somewhat bright, but in terms of next season, they're probably going to be slightly worse. I know we said that last year about them, but if they lose Nikolai Ehlers for nothing, that's going to be a big-time loss. Might have to overpay someone in free agency to kind of try to replace that, or just promote within. I'm not sure Brad Lambert or Kobe Barlow or Braden Yeager are quite going to be that level right out of the gate. Ehlers is a beast, so yeah, he's kind of like a rental for them this season, even though they didn't give up anything. So there's definitely a lot of expectations for Winnipeg. Maybe more so conference final predictions, but still, I'd say even if they lost in the Western Conference Finals, that's pretty disappointing considering back-to-back years of like over 110 points. Next up at number 4, we got the Colorado Avalanche, a recent Cup winner in 2022, but based on what they did at the deadline, what they did overall this season, there is a shit ton of expectations for this team. Up first, they decide Mikko Rantanen, we're not going to give you that 8-year deal at around $12-ish million. So we're trading you. Now, Natchez has looked very good, but now when Mikko Rantanen's in Dallas, they thought, oh, we'll trade him to the Eastern Conference. We'll never have to deal with him. You're going to have to deal with him in the first round. So there's a shit ton of pressure in terms of facing him. And if he goes off, as well as at the deadline, they were so aggressive. The first round pick and their best prospect in Cal Ritchie for Brock Nelson. For a 33-year-old Charlie Coyle, they gave up Casey Middlestat, who's a year removed from back-to-back like high 50-ish point seasons, a second-round pick in Will Zellers, who has been dominating the USHL as a 2024 third-round pick. They gave up a second and a fourth-round pick for Ryan Lindgren. So in my opinion, they shrunk their window from about 5 to 6 more years, basically until McKinnon actually starts to regress at like 35, 36 years old, to probably like 3 to 4 years. They were so aggressive, and now their prospect pool is relatively shit, and they don't have like first-round picks 2 out of the next 3 years. Yeah, they already didn't have this year's because of the Sean Walker trade. And then they traded the 2026 or 2027 conditional. It's going to be conditional in terms of which one they choose. It's going to be a first round pick for Brock Nelson. So yeah, they're all in. They are all in. The only reason they're not top 3, in terms of like this year, they've probably done the most to justify being top 3. But because they do have a Stanley Cup in 2022, I can't quite put them top 3 compared to the top 3 teams. Like, you could guess who the top 3 teams are at this point. Don't have Stanley Cups with this core. Toronto checks in at number 3. When looking at it, very aggressive deadline by Brad Treliving, but they weren't rentals. So at least you can maybe say like, oh, even if they don't go deep, it's still expectation, cup or bust. But Scott Laughton and Carlo are more so not long-term plays, but this season and next at relatively cheap cap hits. When looking at them, yes, you can maybe make the argument that like they have Eastern Conference Finals or Stanley Cup Finals pressure. Like they've only won one playoff series in 8 seasons with this core, but no, they're cup or bust. If they lost in the Stanley Cup final, I'd still deem that a failure of a season for this Toronto Maple Leafs team that has so much star power. There's no moral victory, moral progress when you've been around as a core for so fucking long. So when looking at it, on top of the fact that Mitch Marner and John Tavares are going to be unrestricted free agents this summer, not signed quite yet. Their defense core is kind of old as shit. OEL, Chris Tanev, McCabe's kind of getting up there, I believe. The wheels could fall off with them at any point. So yeah, Toronto, shit ton of expectations. Because those deadline deals weren't quite rentals, I think I'm going to have them at number 3, and I think that makes sense. You assume who the number 2 are at this point. Dallas at number 2. If there was no extension in place for Rantanen and they gave up 2 first-round picks, 2 thirds, and Stankoven, the price probably wouldn't be the same if he didn't have an extension. But if that was the case, they would be number 1. The fact that they were able to extend Mikko Rantanen, he's only 28 years old. He's going to be at a high level for the next 3 to 4 years. They're not quite number 1. They still went very aggressive after making back-to-back Western Conference Finals game 6s. They went aggressive. They got Granlund. They traded Stankoven, obviously, for Rantanen. They are aggressive the next 3 to 4 years. Their window went from like 7 to 8 years probably to like 5 to 6 years. They can't be number 1 again because their best players are still between the ages of like 21 to 28. Like maybe you lose Matthew Shane this summer because he's above a point per game and only making $3 million, and that would stink. And Granlund walks for nothing. But yeah, this team's going to be a high-level contender for at least the next 3 to 4 years, probably 5 to 6 years. But this year definitely signified like this is the first time that Jim Nill's fully going for it. Prior deadlines, Tanev deal was sizable. Domi in 2023, they're fully going for it. And after back-to-back, a little bit disappointing Western Conference exits, they need to win the Stanley Cup. If they lost in the Stanley Cup final, no, failure of a season at this point. And then lastly, it's still Edmonton. It's not even because it's Draisaitl and Bouchard's final year, which coming into the season, that's why I justified it. Their older guys are kind of starting to fall off. When looking at Zach Hyman, he's going to be 33 years old in June. I didn't expect him to score 54 goals in the regular season again, but he's on pace for like 28 goal pace and like 50 point pace. He has not been the same player. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is 32 in a month. His 5-year, he had like 4 or 5 years at $5.125 million. That looked like one of the biggest steals in hockey. He's regressed this season as well. Still a good contract, but again, like their pieces around, even Matthias Ekholm, although Bouchard gets all the hate, Ekholm is definitely kind of somewhat starting to look like his age, and he's going to be 35 in May. So it's as long as they have Draisaitl and McDavid, they're going to be a solid team. They're going to be a top 10 team for sure in the NHL. But as those surrounding pieces that we thought were on such team-friendly deals, Hyman and RNH combined below $11 million, it's starting to come down on the Edmonton Oilers. It's not looking good. And even Draisaitl and McDavid in their own rights are 28 and 29 years old. They're going to be able to play at an extremely high level for into their late 30s probably. But in terms of being dominant like they are right now, even that might only have another 3 to 4 years. So for this Edmonton team, at the deadline, obviously went pretty aggressive, not like Dallas level, but traded a first, second, and fourth for Jake Wallman and Trent Frederick. So they were sizably aggressive. Yeah, they don't have shit in terms of picks. They don't have shit in terms of prospects. I guess Matthew Savoy is like their one solid prospect. Outside of that, there's really not jack dick to replace these guys that are starting to age out of their roles. You can obviously attract people to sign in Edmonton by playing with McDavid and Draisaitl, but even Arvidsson and Skinner have been kind of shit relative to what we expected. So yeah, Stuart Skinner, not down year for him. Edmonton, I think, has the most cup pressure, especially because they made Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final last year. There's no, maybe if the only way that they could have a better season than last year without winning the Stanley Cup is if they went to overtime of Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, but that would still be underwhelming. Yeah, for Edmonton, it is an all-in season next year or in the years to follow. It could potentially not come crashing down, but not be nearly as good as it is right now. And as a result, they're number 1. Let's run through it again. 10, the Capitals. 9, the Canes. 8, the Panthers. 7, the Vegas Golden Knights. 6, Tampa Bay. 5, Winnipeg. 4, Colorado. 3, the Toronto Maple Leafs. 2, Dallas. And number 1, the Oilers. I'll be seeing you in the next one. Let me know in the comments what do you think about this. Peace.